I'm Michael Martinez, and you're about to listen to an AI-generated discussion of my article, What Did Wandering Companies Do? Once again, the AI hosts disappoint me in that they don't know how to pronounce Celeborn correctly. I don't know who out there on the internet is saying Celeborn, but please stop. That's not the correct way to say it. The article itself discusses various types of wandering companies throughout the three ages of Middle-earth. I know there was a fourth age, but Tolkien didn't write about wandering companies in the fourth age. In any event, here you go.
Have you ever found yourself wondering about those elusive groups of elves in Middle-earth? You know, the ones you hear about just sort of wandering.
Hmm.
Were they on some grand ancient pilgrimage, maybe, or just taking a really, really long walk through the woods?
It's a great question.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into exactly that mystery, the wandering companies of elves.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic.
And we're drawing heavily on a fantastic article by Michael Martinez, What Did Wandering Companies Do? It's on his Middle-earth and J.R.R. Tolkien blog. Really insightful stuff.
It is. He lays out a lot of the complexities really well.
It's definitely a question a lot of readers ask,
Yeah.
because the answers aren't just in one place. They're kind of scattered across Tolkien's notes and stories.
Right, you have to piece it together.
So what seems like maybe just a lifestyle choice, maybe a bit aimless, turns out it's way more complex. Surprising, even. Okay, let's unpack this.
What's really compelling here, and Martinez highlights this, is how the whole purpose and the nature of these companies, it changed so much through the different ages of Middle-earth.
Ah, okay, so not just one thing.
Not at all. And it even varied quite a bit depending on which elvish group we're talking about. It's not like a single answer. It's more like a rich, evolving tapestry of elvish life and, well, purpose.
Makes sense.
So our goal today is basically to trace that history, follow their functions, how they changed from the earliest days right up to the Third Age.
Okay, so if we want to understand the Wandering Company, we got to go way back to the beginning, really, to what was probably the first and definitely the biggest wandering group.
The Eldar themselves.
The Eldar.
Yeah.
Undertaking that epic great journey from Cuiviénen towards Valinor. Now, my mental image is this, like relentless march across the continent.
Yeah.
But that wasn't quite it, was it?
No, not really. It's easy to picture it that way, like a continuous trek. But Martinez points out they often traveled only short distances at a time. They'd camp for, well, sometimes extended periods, especially while the Vala Arome was maybe scouting ahead or dealing with something else. It wasn't a forced march, more deliberate,
Measured.
And here's a detail from the article that really kind of shifted how I saw that whole journey. During those long stops, they didn't just rest. They actually grew food.
Yeah.
Specifically this white corn, which, later became the key ingredient for lembas. That elvish way bread.
That's a crucial detail.
It really is. It paints a picture of a journey that's, well, much more sustainable, more deliberate than I first thought. Not some desperate scramble, but almost living with the land as they moved. Kind of foreshadows their connection to nature later on, doesn't it?
Exactly. That detail really reshapes how we think about that journey. It shows their deep connection to the land, their foresight maybe.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't just, passing through. They were interacting, shaping their environment.
Mm.
And this whole idea of different choices on the journey, it's perfectly shown by the Nandor.
Ah, right. The ones who turned aside. Exactly. While most Eldar pushed on towards Valinor, a big group part of the Teleri kindred, they made a different choice. They stopped, basically, in the Vales of Anduin, didn't cross the Misty Mountains, and they became the Nandor.
So this group, the Nandor, they chose a different path, literally.
Mhm.
Martinez describes them as simply wandered around Middle-earth as they pleased, making no permanent homes.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like the classic wandering company, doesn't it? Just roaming free.
Yeah.
But how did that nomadic life shape them? The article does note they could not have developed a very sophisticated culture compared to, say, Valinor or later Beleriand. What does that really mean, though?
Well, it's a fascinating split, isn't it? And while, maybe they didn't build huge cities like the Noldor or Sindar, that less sophisticated label needs some context, I think.
Okay.
Their choice was about freedom, right? Deep connection with the wild, maybe over the structured grandeur of cities. It's a different kind of elvishness. And Martinez does stress they kept up communication. They had leaders like Lenwë and later his son Denethor. It wasn't just chaos.
Right, it wasn't aimless.
Not entirely. In fact, Denethor, he eventually gathered a lot of these Nandor and led them over the Blue Mountains, the Ered Luin, into Beleriand.
Oh, okay. So they did eventually settle somewhere.
Some did, yes. They settled in Osirian, those woods in the southeast of Beleriand, and they became known as the Legrim, the Green Elves.
The Green Elves, right.
And their lifestyle was still pretty unique. They famously didn't hunt much. They made loads of songs, lived quietly, but they weren't passive. They fiercely protected their lands. They did sometimes go to war against Morgoth's forces. So even liking peace didn't mean they wouldn't fight when needed.
So it seems like even for those who chose wandering, danger could push them towards settling down. But what happens when even those settled places start falling apart?
Yeah. That leads us to a much darker time.
Towards the end of the First Age, Beleriand is collapsing kingdom by kingdom under Morgoth's power. A lot of elves are suddenly refugees, back on the move, but this time, it's desperate.
Completely different circumstances.
The article paints a grim picture of these outlaw elves. They weren't choosing to wander now, were they?
No, absolutely not. This was pure survival. These were elves who'd lost everything, homes, family, their whole way of life. And Martinez points out something really stark. It's unlikely these outlaw elves would have been able to sustain themselves on Limbas.
Wow. So the very thing that helped their ancestors on the Great Journey
Was probably out of reach for these desperate refugees. It's a brutal reminder of how bad things got. They couldn't even rely on that fundamental elvish magic for sustenance.
That is a stark reality check. Just imagine, on the run, can't rely on magic bread, constantly hunting for food for shelter. And then to make it worse, they found little or no welcome elsewhere.
Yeah, it wasn't just lack of hospitality either.
No, the article explains Morgoth was actively messing with things, sending thralls, mind-controlled elves basically among them to sow distrust, break up any groups trying to form.
That psychological aspect, the paranoia, must have been awful.
Yeah, not knowing who to trust, even among your own kind. That sounds absolutely shattering for any sense of elvish community.
It really does. It would make forming any large, organized, wandering company of outlaws incredibly hard, probably impossible to sustain. They'd likely be solitary or in tiny, wary groups. Martinez does mention briefly that some might have eventually reached Arvernian, down by the mouths of Sirion, a kind of last precarious refuge.
But it sounds like their stories mostly got lost.
Seems that way. Tolkien's pretty silent on their specific fate. Maybe their numbers just dwindled or their stories were just swallowed by the tragedy of the age. It's a real shift, isn't it? Wandering goes from purposeful movement to just desperate flight.
And that devastation kind of sets the stage for the Second Age, doesn't it? A time of, well, trying to rebuild, but also new threats.
Exactly. After the War of Wrath, the world is remade. Many Eldar sail west to Tolaresia, but many stay.
Right, the ones who remained in Middle-earth. Surviving Eldar, Nandor, Avari. They mostly settle in Lindon, that coastal bit left over from Beleriand, and also western Eriador.
So what about wandering companies, then? Did they reemerge?
It seems like for a while a new form did pop up. Martinez suggests that from these survivors, new wandering companies formed in the Second Age. Maybe they went back to a sort of semi-nomadic life, a bit like the early Nandor.
Okay, so back to that graze in the land kind of idea.
Possibly. Stop in only long enough to replenish their supplies, as Martinez puts it. But their existence was incredibly fragile this time. They were very exposed when Sauron, Morgoth's top lieutenant, started making his move.
Ah, Sauron. His rise must have hit them hard. The article notes these companies were destroyed or driven to hiding during the War of the Elves and Sauron, that war between, S.A. 1697 and 1701?
That's the one. A really brutal conflict, especially in Eriador.
It sounds like another shattering blow. Any sort of renewed, stable, nomadic, elvish life just gone again. Pretty much. And Martinez points out that Tolkien doesn't actually mention these specific Second Age wandering companies again after that war.
Really? So they just vanished from the record?
It raises a big question, yeah. Did they just cease to exist entirely, or did they become so few, so scattered, that they weren't really a distinct feature anymore? It seems likely that after that kind of devastation, wandering freely wouldn't be much of an option outside the protected elvish realms like Lindon or a region before it fell.
It's like the trauma of Sauron's war kind of erased that particular way of elvish life for a long time. A gap in the story.
It really feels that way. A fascinating void in the lore.
It's quite striking, isn't it?
Yeah.
How the context of each age just completely changes what a wandering company even is. Which brings us to the Third Age. Here, things seem to shift again.
Definitely. A clear evolution.
We still hear about elves traveling across Eriador back and forth, but now there seems to be a much more, defined purpose, almost ceremonial sometimes.
That's a good way to put it. The article highlights that some groups, especially later in the Third Age, were making special pilgrimages.
Pilgrimages. Like to where?
A key one was to Elasterion. That's the tallest of the White Towers, west of the Shire, overlooking Mithlond, the Grey Havens.
And why go there?
To gaze into Elendil's Palantir, one of the seeing stones that was kept there. A connection to the past, maybe to the west.
Ah, okay. So purposeful travel. And Gildor and Glorian and his group, they're the classic example of this, right? The ones Frodo meets in the Shire.
Exactly. They're probably the most famous example for readers. They walk through the Shire, often at night, clearly on these specific journeys. It's not just aimless wandering anymore. It's travel with a clear goal.
And there's that intriguing detail Martinez mentions about Gildor's folk. They had at least one regular camping spot, a sheltered place in the hills above Woodhall.
Yeah, near Woody End.
Which has led people to speculate. Maybe Gildor's group and others like them had a whole network, like a chain of hidden stopping places protected by trees all across Eriador.
Ooh, I like that idea.
Imagine that. Secret Elvish way stations. It suggests a much more organized, almost logistical side to their travels in the Third Age.
That network idea really fits the shift, doesn't it? From casual wandering to planned, purposeful movement. It implies foresight, safety planning. And we have even bigger examples from Tolkien. Martinez calls Arwen's marriage procession the most detailed example of a Third Age wandering company.
Right. That was huge, wasn't it? Elrond, Celeborn, Galadriel, loads of elves from Rivendell and Lothlorien.
A massive group, yeah. Traveling all the way down to Gondor for the wedding.
That's a major undertaking. And they didn't just go straight there and back, did the article say?
No, they took their time on the return journey, too. Came back north along the Greenway. They even stopped in Dunland for about a week. Then Celeborn and Galadriel led their folk back over the mountains. It shows these weren't just dashes from A to B. They were significant journeys, celebrations, connections. And then you have the very end of the age, that large group of elves accompanying Elrond, Galadriel, Gildor to Mithlond for the final sailing. That journey itself was the ultimate pilgrimage, wasn't it? Leaving Middle-earth for Valinor.
The final journey. And then there's Legolas. His story offers maybe the most unique purpose for a wandering company in this era. He brought some of his people south to Ithilien after the War of the Ring.
Yes, a land that had been really badly scarred by war, right next to Mordor.
So that couldn't have just been a casual trip.
No way. They must have formed one or more wandering companies for that journey south. But their mission wasn't just travel, it was, well, restorative.
Restorative, how so?
Their specific goal was helping to cleanse, restore, and beautify lands, like Ithilien, making the wilderness fair again. If you connect that to the bigger picture, it's this profound final act of stewardship.
Wow. Even as many elves are leaving, some stay, or at least linger, to heal the land.
Exactly. It raises that fascinating question. Why invest so much in Middle-earth if you're leaving? It just speaks volumes about their deep, deep connection to the world, right to the very end.
What a journey we've taken just talking about this. So, to kind of sum up the Third Age functions, Martinez shows they were about ensuring safety for elvish travelers.
Protection.
Definitely moving with clear purpose, point A to point B, not just wandering.
Right. Clear destinations.
Sometimes doing specific tasks, maybe dealing with dangerous creatures or, things lurking about.
Practical missions too, yeah.
And for Legolas, that amazing active restoration work. And overall, in the Third Age, very much linked to pilgrimages or that final departure. The whole meaning of wandering had just completely transformed.
It really had. You go from the earliest Eldar growing food on their journey to the Nandor choosing freedom in the wild, then the desperate outlaw elves just trying to survive, the fragile survivors of Sauron's wars. And finally, these purposeful pilgrims and healers of the Third Age. The whole idea of an elvish wandering company, it's this constantly changing thread through Middle-earth's history.
It's incredible. It reveals so much survival, adapting, ceremony, community, even taking care of the environment. It really wasn't just aimless roaming, was it? It shows how diverse and, resilient elvish life in Middle-earth actually was.
Definitely resilient.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. And thanks again to Michael Martinez for his insightful work on his blog. Really helped frame this whole discussion.
Absolutely. And maybe this leaves a thought for you, the listener. If those elves who stayed behind, like Legolas and Ithilien, found their purpose in these specific tasks restoring, aiding others, what does that tell us about how much they valued their remaining time in Middle-earth, even while many others were getting ready to leave for good?
How might that final purposeful contribution change how we see their legacy in Middle-earth? Something to think about.
Definitely.
Until next time, keep exploring.